There is a fire burning in my kitchen right now, but you can't see the flame. You can't smell the gas, and there isn't a single cord plugged into a wall. Look at this pot of beef stew. I brought it to a boil for exactly 5 minutes at 7 o'clock this morning. It's now past noon. I haven't touched a dial. I haven't spent a cent on electricity. And yet, when I lift this lid, the steam that hits my face is over 180 degrees. The meat is tender, the carrots are perfect, and the broth is rich. The world would have you believe that to feed your family, you need a $1,200 smart oven, a monthly tribute to the utility company, and a kitchen full of glowing digital displays. They want you to believe that heat is something you must constantly buy, minute by minute, or your stove goes cold and your dinner stays raw. They are wrong. What I'm using is a system that was common in Mennonite households for generations, a system that was polished to a science in 1946 and then quietly buried under a mountain of post-war appliance advertisements. It's called a Fireless Cooker, or a Haybox. It cost me exactly $0 to build using scraps from the barn. The reason you've likely never heard of it and the reason your grandmother stopped using hers is honestly quite simple. There is no money to be made in a kitchen that doesn't need a meter. There is no subscription model for a box filled with straw. Stick with me because I'm going to show you the thermodynamics of Providence. I'm going to show you why a bale of hay is more efficient than a microwave, how the English world was convinced to trade their independence for a utility bill, and exactly how you can build a 1946 spec thermal cooker this afternoon that will cut your cooking fuel by 80% for the rest of your life. To understand why this works, you have to understand the folly of the modern stove. When you cook a pot of beans on a gas burner for 2 hours, where do you think that heat is going? Only a tiny fraction stays in the bean. The rest, the vast majority, is escaping into your kitchen, out the vent, and into the atmosphere. You are paying to heat the air around the pot, not the food inside it. The modern world treats heat like a leaky bucket. They keep the tap running because they've forgotten how to plug the holes. In 1946, as the world emerged from the shadow of war, fuel was a precious gift. Stewardship wasn't just a virtue, it was a necessity. People understood a fundamental law of the Creator. Heat is energy, and energy doesn't just disappear, it only moves. If you can stop it from moving, you can make it work for you for hours after the fire's been put out. This is the principle of retained heat. Think of a hot stone pulled from a campfire. It stays hot for hours because it has thermal mass. Now, think of that stone wrapped in a thick wool blanket. It stays hot until the next morning. A fireless cooker is simply a highly insulated nest for your cooking pot. You bring your food to a rolling boil on a stove just long enough to ensure the core of every potato and piece of meat has reached 212 degrees. Then, you shut off the fuel. You lift the pot and nestle it into a box packed tight with natural insulators, hay, straw, wool, or even dried leaves. Once that lid is closed, the physics are absolute. Because the heat has nowhere to go, it stays inside the pot. The food continues to cook in its own trapped energy. It doesn't boil over. It doesn't burn. It doesn't dry out. It simply finishes the work the fire started, using the quiet flame of physics. The part that gets me every time I think about it is how much we've been taught to rely on English complexity. The appliance industry in the late 1940s had a problem. People were too self-sufficient. If a housewife could cook an entire Sunday roast using only 10 minutes of coal, she didn't need the newest electric range. She didn't need the all-electric kitchen that the magazines were pushing. So, they buried the Haybox. They rebranded it as primitive. They told us that modern meant instant, and instant meant expensive. They traded the stewardship of the old paths for the convenience of the plug. Today, the average American household spends hundreds of dollars a year just to keep a stove top hot, while the 1946 system sits on a shelf, gathering dust in the back of our collective memory. But here is the truth. The utility companies cannot afford to put on your bill. Thermodynamics don't negotiate. A pot of boiling water holds a massive amount of energy. In an insulated environment, It takes hours, sometimes days, for that energy to dissipate. Let's talk about the build. I want to be real with you. This isn't furniture. It's a tool. In 1946, these were often built out of old shipping crates or apple boxes. To build your own, you need three things: an outer container, a thick layer of insulation, and a nesting spot for your pot. First, the box. A wooden crate is best, about twice as wide and twice as deep as your largest cooking pot. If you don't have wood, even a heavy-duty cardboard box or a discarded trunk will work. Second, the insulation. This is where the world gets fancy, but the plain folks stay simple. Hay is the traditional choice because it's free in any barn, but it has to be bone dry. If hay isn't available, you can use wool blankets, sawdust, or even crumpled up newspapers. In the 1946 manuals, they often used mineral wool. But we prefer the gifts of the earth. Pack the bottom of your box with 6 inches of insulation. Pack it tight. Third, the nest. Place your cooking pot in the center and pack more insulation around the sides. You want the pot to fit snugly, like a hand in a glove. Now, here is the secret to high retention. The cushion. You need a thick fabric bag filled with insulation, a pillow, essentially that sits right on top of the pot before you close the lid of the box. This prevents the heat from rising and escaping through the top. Total cost? If you have a box and some old blankets or dry grass, it's $0. If you buy a bag of wood shavings at a farm supply store, maybe $5. Here is exactly how you use it, and the mistakes the English make when they try to rush the process. You cannot just put warm food in here. It must be a hard boil. For a stew or beans, let it boil vigorously for 5 to 10 minutes on the stove. This ensures the pot itself and the liquid are at maximum thermal capacity. The moment you turn off the heat, the pot must go into the box. Every second the lid is off in the open air, you are losing minutes of cooking time. Move quickly. Drop the pot into its nest. Place the top cushion on immediately and shut the box lid tight. And then, and this is the hardest part for the modern mind, you must leave it alone. Do not peek. Do not check. Every time you open that lid to see if it's done, you let out the very energy that is doing the work. You are a steward of that heat now. Don't waste it. A pot of rice takes 15 minutes of boiling and 1 hour in the box. A hearty beef stew takes 10 minutes of boiling and 4 to 5 hours in the box. Dry beans, the ultimate test of thrift, take 15 minutes of boiling and 6 hours in the box. They come out creamier than any stovetop bean you've ever tasted because they were never agitated by the violence of a constant boil. Now, I want to add some information that most people skip, because being a good steward means being a safe one. There is a danger zone in food science. Temperatures between 40 and 140 degrees where bacteria can grow. Because a Haybox is a passive system, you must ensure your food stays above 140 degrees until it's time to eat. A well-insulated box will keep a large pot of stew above 160 degrees for over 6 hours. However, if you are cooking a very small amount of food in a very large pot, there isn't enough thermal mass to hold the heat. Always use the smallest pot that will hold your food, or fill the extra space with boiling water. Maintenance is also key. After every use, take the insulation out or leave the box open to the sun. The steam from the pot can sometimes create a little dampness in the hay or blankets. Damp insulation is a poor insulator and can lead to musty smells. Keep your nest dry, and it will serve you for 40 years. In a community setting, this is a game changer. Imagine a church carry-in or a barn raising. You can start the food at dawn, put it in the boxes, and transport it miles away. When it's time to eat, the food isn't just warm, it's freshly finished. No need for generators. No need for chafing dishes with expensive wax candles. Just the heat you captured at home. The thing that stays with me as I look at this simple wooden box is the quietness of it all. The modern world is so loud. It's full of the hum of fans, the beeping of timers, and the frantic energy of people trying to outrun their own bills. We've been convinced that to move forward, we have to move faster. But the Mennonites and the resourceful folk of 1946 knew a different truth. They knew that the old paths were often the most efficient. They knew that God provided the laws of thermodynamics not so we could exploit them for profit, but so we could be good stewards of the resources we were given. $1,200 for a stove that breaks in 5 years? Or a wooden box and some hay that lasts a lifetime and cooks for free? When you start using a fireless cooker, something happens to your spirit. You stop rushing. You start planning your meals with the rhythm of the sun. You realize that you don't need to be tethered to a grid to have a H